States. So a little bit about me. I'm Dr. Amanda Glaze-Crampes, and I'm an assistant professor in science education at Georgia Southern University in Savannah, Georgia. And I study the places where science and faith tend to interact. So that would be classrooms, communities, within families. So looking at the intersections of science and society and how the perceived conflict we see often with these elements impacts science literacy here in the United States. So I do what I do in the southeastern United States because to me, the Southeast is a very unique place to study really anything that has to do with science and faith. And that's because of this wonderful concept Kinchlow and Pinar framed called significance of place. And it's this idea that because of shared underpinning cultures that exist in a region, that there are impacts that go beyond the individual level. So while we don't all have the exact same culture here in the southeastern United States, there are a lot of things in our politics, in our society, in our civil structures that are tied into underpinning currents of existing culture. And that tends to be a fundamental evangelical Christian culture here in the Southeast. So I was actually born and reared in rural Alabama in a ministry family. So one side of my family is in the Southern Baptist ministry tradition, and the other side is United Methodist. And so I came up very much a part of that shared culture where the idea is that church is family. And even today, if you look in a town of 6,000 people outside of where I grew up, I think we had 38 Protestant churches for 6,000 people, one Catholic church, and when I was in my 20s, there was a mosque for the first time. So it's very much a part of the fabric of community. But what we don't often see is that when there are things that we're taught or things that we're talking about in the classroom, and those things don't quite jive with what we've been taught at home or in our faith traditions, there can be a conflict there that really plays off of what Briana was talking about with the interactions between knowledge and accepting something. So you can know a lot about something. It's your ability to recall, or you can build that up further to understanding where you can do new things with it. But the idea of acceptance is, are you willing to do things with it? And that's one of the places where we see this really unique interaction between evolution specifically, but science and faith, in that with almost any topic, the more you learn, the more accepting you become. You see the evidence, you can explore the concepts, and okay, that makes sense. It's real. I know this is happening. I can talk to my friends about it. I can talk to my family. But when it comes to evolution, there's this entirely different phenomenon. There is no predictable measure of connection between how much a person knows and whether they accept evolution or science for that matter. So for example, you can know absolutely nothing about evolution from a content standpoint and yet be completely advocating for evolution. Yes, that's a fact. I'm wholeheartedly behind it. And yet people can know everything in terms of content about evolution, and yet actively choose to deny that it actually happens. And that's a unique dynamic to study in the South because we do see a lot of conflict among that young earth creationist conceptualization, the literal interpretation of the Bible. And it produces very rich stories that people have about, well, I learned this in school, but I came home and, it was literally considered a taboo, which was my experience actually growing up. So I didn't learn about evolution in school. I learned about it from reading the book when it was told that we would be skipping it in my honors biology class. Went home to talk to my family and it was meltdown. And so many years later, in conversations with people about this experience, I realized, this is not a common experience for some of the people that I work with and I know, and it is for others. So it really created a curiosity in me for, why does this happen? And then more importantly, what can we do for this? Because if teaching content is not enough to make someone consider scientific literacy, then we have a major problem, because it does negatively impact our scientific literacy, as does putting together this idea of us versus them. Rabbi Middleman was talking about the forced false dichotomy. And so my interest became, how do you have discourse about this? How do you have conversations with people about science and faith? And it brings this idea of radical empathy, which aligns so well to faith tradition, because we talk about things like agape love in our faith traditions across different traditions. But how do you put yourself as a scientist as well into the shoes of someone else to empathize in a way that you can have conversations and create a space and make it where it's no longer a battle to try to overcome someone's culture and beliefs and background, but rather this dynamic engagement that allows everyone, regardless of where they come from, to build into their existing worldviews a scientific worldview that appreciates and understands science. And so, the short version is there's always these unseen factors. So we have to stop assuming that people are ignorant if they don't know. We have to stop talking and seek first to understand others before we can seek to have them understand us. We have to recognize that evidence, in a lot of cases where worldview and faith are involved, has limited power, but voice carries. And then, of course, to be willing to step outside of our echo chambers and focus on the middle, because there are so many people that are interested and have questions. And if we don't create the space for them to engage, to ask questions, to feel comfortable, nobody else will. And we'll just continue to be at sort of a standstill when it comes to these elements.